I've talked about consistent characters before, but we've never really touched upon how to create consistent environments. And let me be clear, with the current state of the tech, it's not really possible to create an entirely consistent environment within Midjourney. That would actually require a three-dimensional model of a particular space, which you could then observe from different angles. And who knows, maybe that's something that we'll be doing in the future one day. However, for the time being, we're going to have to settle with something that's at least close enough. So let's dive into this quick overview on how to create quasi-consistent environments within Midjourney. So let's quickly talk about why you would want to do something like this in the first place. If you're working on any type of story, whether it be a comic book, a children's book, or maybe just a storyboard for a new film, then most of your scenes will revolve around specific locations. Now, obviously, not every shot will take place in the same spot, but I think that you know what I mean. We've all seen enough movies and TV shows to understand that location does matter. Now, of course, all of this somewhat assumes that you actually have a good idea of the world in which your story is taking place. And if you don't, then you're actually going to have a tough time creating consistent environments. Now, obviously, Midjourney will be able to help you get some inspiration, but ultimately, you're going to need some imagination in order to actually visualize the world that your story is taking place in. And in fact, the more specific you can get, the better. Now, for those of you who aren't particularly good at visualizing something in your head, it sometimes helps to put things on paper. So to make things a little bit easier, let me show you how a simple blueprint can guide you through your creation process. In this tutorial, I'm going to create a series of images that all revolve around the very same location. And my location is a medieval castle surrounded by a large moat. I created the following simple schematic within an image editor of my choice. The teal colored areas represent land. The sky blue areas are the moat around the castle, which is filled with water. You can also see two bridges that connect the shore with the castle, and the castle has three main spaces: a small courtyard on the left, a large courtyard with a fountain in the center, and the royal chamber on the right. The yellow triangles that you see are locations and perspectives for which I want to create individual images. Now remember, this is just a schematic, and we won't necessarily be able to recreate this location pixel for pixel. However, a blueprint like this can really help you figure out what sort of images you actually need to create for your story. The images themselves don't necessarily have to contain any characters yet. Most of that can be done with in-painting or other post-processing methods. Close-up shots of particular characters also only give you a glimpse of the environment, so their consistency actually isn't that relevant in those shots. Anyway, now that I have an idea of what I'm going to create, it's time to get started. So before I can even begin to worry about structural consistency of my location, I first need to nail down a specific style. The theme of this world will be dark, mysterious, and cold. And if you're familiar with the TV show Vikings, then it's that sort of vibe that I'm aiming for. So not the actual Nordic culture theme, but the weather, the color grading, and the atmosphere. And I started out with the following prompt. Imagine film still, wide-angle shot of medieval castle, overcast. The first set of images that I got was actually pretty good, but I was aiming for something even darker. I made a very slight adjustment to the prompt by adding creepy, foggy, and cold gray color scheme. And this eventually gave me some shots that were absolutely perfect. So just to be clear, the following part of the prompt will serve as a stylistic template for most of the other images that I'll create. Not all of them, but most of them. Now, technically, you could probably already use many of these images to cover some of the requirements from our blueprint. You could also just re-roll the very same prompt in order to get a number of different angles. You could also use very strong to generate variations of specific compositions that you like. So for example, the bottom left image here could easily be used for the following camera angle from my blueprint. So once I had my style nailed down, I decided to work on the shot that you see in the bottom left corner of the blueprint. So the tricky thing about this shot is that it's actually quite specific. I could try to get this specific shot with just a text prompt, but there's a fair chance that it's going to be very difficult to do. So I decided to use an image reference in order to frame my subject the way I want it to look. And here's the reference image that I found on the web that I'll be using for this. I chose this one because it had just the right angle that I needed, and then I simply added my original text prompt. Imagine, and then begins with the image reference, and then film still, wide angle shot of medieval castle with moat, overcast. I limited the image weight to 0.5 because otherwise most of the images would rarely contain a bridge. You'll also notice that I left out some of the stylistic details. We'll bring those back in a bit. So I had to re-roll this prompt twice, but I eventually got this set of images. From these, I picked the bottom right one, and I upscaled it. Since I wasn't super happy with the bridge, I then used Scaffolding Remix by hitting the very subtle button and removing the image reference. Hey, sorry for interrupting you right in the middle of the video, but I just wanted to share something with you. As many of you know, I have an online video course called Masters of Midjourney, which teaches you all of the foundational skills that you need in order to get the most out of Midjourney. And I know that some of you are still on the fence, trying to figure out whether this is right for you. And I get it. You look at all of the free stuff that I share right here on my YouTube channel, and you ask yourself, how much more can there really be? Well, many of the things that I do in these videos, including the method that I just used, are explained in far more detail in the course. I show many different examples, and I teach these to a degree that makes sure that you really understand how they work, and you can apply them to pretty much any project, not just one particular use case. So if you want to learn how to control Midjourney and prompt with intent, then visit mastersofmidjourney.com. I'll see you on the flip side. This gave me this set of 4 images, from which I upscaled the bottom left one, and I repeated the process one more time. The only difference is that this time I added my other stylistic elements into the prompt. And finally, this produced the following set of images, from which I decided to go with the bottom right one. Next, I wanted to create the shot for the moat bridge. At the lower end of my blueprint, you can see that I planned for a camera angle looking straight across the moat bridge. To do this, I started off with my usual prompt. Imagine film still, symmetrical shot of stone moat bridge leading toward medieval castle. Creepy, overcast, foggy, cold gray color scheme. As you can see, I only made adjustments to the subject and environment. This took a couple of attempts, but I eventually ended up with these 4 images. And from these, I really liked the bottom right one. The only thing that bothered me was the fact that the area to the right of the castle was empty, and that didn't really make sense in the context of my blueprint. I figured I could probably fix this with inpainting, but boy oh boy was I wrong. I'm not going to go over all of the different attempts that I made, but just have a look at some of these results. So no matter what I prompted, Midjourney seemed to just refuse to give me what I want. The last one was okay-ish, but seriously, if anyone from Midjourney is watching, this definitely needs to improve. Not only does it waste tons of GPU hours, it also feels like Adobe's generative fill does a much better job at this. So either the model is actively ignoring the prompts, or at the very least, it's totally unclear how we should be prompting. So now that we've covered the outside of our castle, let's move to the courtyard. So this is where things get a little bit easier. I started off with a simple prompt using my stylistic template. Imagine film still, wide angle shot of courtyard of medieval castle, creepy overcast, foggy, cold gray color scheme. As you can see, the only thing that I changed here was the subject, and this produced the following image grid. I really liked the courtyard and the arches of the arcades in the bottom right images, so I used high variation mode to generate 4 more options. From these, I decided to go with the top right image and upscaled it. Since I wasn't too happy with the fountain, I tried generating some alternatives by pressing very strong and changing the prompt a little bit. While this did produce some nicer fountains, it also changed most of the environment. You could probably still use these, especially if you wanted to create a shot from the other side. But in my particular case, I actually wanted to stick with the previous scene. So what I did instead is I upscaled the bottom left image, and I then took a screenshot of just the fountain. I then uploaded the image to Discord so that I can use it as an image reference. I then went back to this image of our courtyard and pressed the Vary Region button. Since the foundation of the fountain was good, I only selected the upper section of the fountain and changed the prompt to this. That actually worked surprisingly well, and I ended up with these 4 images, of which the top left was the most suitable for my particular needs. Now, unfortunately, the next part is a little bit trickier. I still need a shot of the courtyard's gallery, or at least something that resembles it. So let's have a closer look at our blueprint and the specific angle that we need. The primary challenge here is to create an image that looks like it's located somewhere within the courtyard's gallery. This is incredibly difficult to do, and for the most part, you'll have to rely on imagery that basically only hints at the courtyard without actually showing it. In other words, you want to create images that could be in the precise locations that you want them to be without it being particularly obvious. But let me show you some examples of what I mean. I mostly used the following prompt as well as slight variations of it. Film still, balcony overseeing rectangular courtyard of medieval castle, and then it's just the rest of our prompt. This particular prompt gave me the following images. Now, I didn't get all of these in the same attempt. These are literally just the best ones that I picked from all of my rerolls. They aren't perfect, but they are good enough as starting points for derivative shots for a specific scene. Alright, so it's time to move on to the final area of our location. Let's have another quick look at our blueprint. The section on the right is what we're going to work on next. This started off pretty easily with a simple prompt using our template. Imagine film still royal chamber of medieval castle. My very first attempt already gave me something that was reasonably usable. While most of these look a bit too run down, I really like the top right one. So I upscaled it. Creating variations of this is now really easy because you can simply hit the very strong button until you find something that really fits your needs. But I actually want to illustrate something else here. Previously, it would have been really difficult to place a character inside our scenes. We would have had to do tons of editing in an external application, but now, with in-painting, things are a lot easier. Now, I've complained a lot about Midjourney's new in-painting feature, but this is actually one of those things where it tends to actually deliver. So I hit the very region button, selected the location where I wanted to place my queen character, and simply changed the prompt. And as you can see in these images, it actually does a really good job of placing the character into the scene. If we take a closer look at the faces, then it's pretty clear that there still are some issues, but it's nothing that can't be fixed with some face swapping. And this is something you can easily do with any of the other scenes that we've created so far. But guess what? I'm still not done yet. Let's take this one step further. You might remember my video on impossible shots from just a few weeks ago. Well, the very same technique that I showed you there can be used to reframe a scene that you've already created. Let me explain. Let's have another look at our royal chambers. Now, what I want to do is I want to place my queen on the staircase, and I also want the composition to be limited to a very specific area of this scene. So what I do is I take a screenshot of that very specific section and I then upload it to Discord. I then use this as an image reference in the following prompt. Imagine, and it starts off with my image reference, film still, close-up shot of queen standing on wide staircase inside royal chamber of medieval castle. This then gave me the following 4 images, of which some were better than others. However, I really liked the bottom left one. I know it's not 100% the same as my reference, but it's close enough and simply flipped horizontally. I then upscaled that image, but I still wasn't done yet. You see, very often this process will result in images that aren't as crisp as the others. But one way to fix this is by hitting the very subtle button and simply removing the image reference and making a slight adjustment to the prompt. What this then does is it will try to superimpose a crisper interpretation of the prompt onto the existing compositional support. In other words, it keeps most of the composition intact, it just adds a little more detail so that the image looks more realistic. Now, obviously, it isn't without flaws, but the image on the bottom right already looks a bit better. And if you wanted to, you could repeat this process multiple times over until you get what you want. So just to recap, let's have a quick look at our blueprint. We started off by creating some initial shots that eventually led us to the following image. We then proceeded to creating the exterior shot of the castle with its moat and the bridge using an image reference. Then we created a symmetrical shot of the moat bridge looking straight at the castle gate. We then moved inside the castle and created a nice wide shot of the courtyard, including some adjustments to make the fount look better. We then tried creating some shots of the gallery on the upper level and ended up with shots like this one. And finally, we moved inside the royal chambers, where we not only placed a character, but also reframed the existing scene. And this is how you can create something that I call quasi-consistent environments. You basically create lots of stylistically similar imagery that reflects perspectives within a fictional space that you've imagined. And the blueprint is simply meant to help you do this. It basically acts as a to-do list. Now, with all of these different images and prompts, you can now basically create any shot that you need. And remember, most of the time, they won't even need to be very specific. What counts is the atmosphere, the general vibe, and in the end, mainly your characters. So I hope you found these insights useful, and I wish you lots of fun creating your own quasi-consistent fictional worlds. Remember to check the video description for my Midjourney course, as well as a whole bunch of other free stuff. That's it for today. I'll see you next week. Keep on learning and take care.